Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for taking time out and welcoming us here. We appreciate it. Special thanks to Dave McBride, who's going to hear this presentation twice in a week because he heard it last Friday morning.
I love it.
We're glad to hear that. That's a sign of a good board member, which David is, of the Delaware Center for Justice. So thank you. DCJ just turned 100 years old in June. We began as the Prisoners Aid Society back in 1920 and evolved into an organization that over the years has had some balance of, was starting out completely as an organization that was focused on prison reform and then later criminal justice reform, and then bringing in some programming, which over the years has become the largest part of our work, although we have always maintained a policy presence, as Kayleigh's presence here tonight represents. It's important to note that we do policy work, but we're not a partisan organization. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. So we support a policy agenda, not parties and not candidates. And tonight is actually pretty exciting because Kayleigh is going to be sharing later our actual policy, like official policy agenda for 2021, because we finalized it today with our working policy committee, and that's for her to talk about in a little bit. I'm not going to walk through all of DCJ's programs. I'm going to highlight some things that have really been developing over the last year or so. I would encourage you to take a look at our website, and that'll appear on a slide later, but it's www.dcjustice.org. I would also encourage you to be gentle as you look at that website. It is old and needs some work and is currently under revision. And hopefully we'll have a new website in place by the end of the year. But there is still a lot of good information there, including on all of our programs. DCJ provides services to youth and adults at all levels of the legal system, from folks who are youth who are adjudicated, youth who are in the community, youth who are in detention, adults who are incarcerated, as well as adults who are reentering the community, as well as victim services. We offer crime victim services for folks over 50 and victim services through our mediation program. But tonight I'm going to focus on our largest endeavor, which is reentry services. Our oldest reentry program, Community Reintegration Services, has been operating in Newcastle County for over 20 years. In mid-2019, we secured funding from the Criminal Justice Council to expand that case management work into Kent and Sussex counties. That case management work uses several evidence-based tools to really provide a quality service to help folks adjust back to the community. So that was sort of the beginning of real growth for that program, was expanding statewide late last year. The grant that allowed that expansion also allowed us to include cognitive behavioral therapy groups across the state, working with reentering folks. And it also connected us with Two Fish Home Renovations, which you may be aware of. That's a company that provides employment and job skills training for reentering persons. And for Newcastle County, it also serves as the site of our cognitive behavioral therapy groups. So the folks are learning about how to make better decisions in their lives, literally sitting in a circle with the people they work with every day. So it's very much a real-time, reality-focused therapy. This summer, we partnered with the Department of Correction and the Department of Housing to be the point of contact for a new project that allows reentering persons to live with folks who are already living in public housing. Nationwide, that's always been a sticking point. Typically, states will not allow folks who are coming out of prison or have a criminal record to live in public housing, even if it's with their loved ones. And we know that stable housing is critical to successful reentry. So this was really important, and it was something that was developed over a long period of time. So we're really, really proud to be part of that. Also, our work with Two Fish and other programs focuses on the other major indicator of success in reentry, which is employment. So by focusing on housing and employment, as well as the day-to-day case management we provide, we're really trying to help folks across the board in every aspect of their lives to successfully re-enter into the community. We've also grown yet again. Just at the beginning of October, I'm going to share a story of one of our clients. and sort of tell the story of what that new expanded version of our program can do. The gentleman's name is Ahmed. Ahmed finished up his probation or his prison sentence last month. 4 days before he was released, he found out he was positive for the coronavirus. He was asymptomatic. Ahmed had been in prison for 2 years, and we talk a lot about folks who are coming out after 10, 20, 30 years and what a different world it must be for them to come out and in our digital space with social media and all the connectedness we have and the speed with which we can transmit information. But even for someone who's been in for just 2 years, they are literally coming out to a new world with the coronavirus. He has to deal with wearing masks. He has to deal with social distancing. He's entering the job market in a time of record unemployment. Even worse, his closest family members aren't local. They're not in Delaware, even though he is a Delawarean. And because he has coronavirus, he's not being released to a home plan. He's being released to a hotel for first responders and people who are COVID positive. And under those circumstances, he's expected to rebuild his life from scratch. Even something as simple as after DCJ transported him from the prison to the facility where he was staying. And I happened to do the transport since it was our first one for a COVID positive individual. When all was said and done and we're standing the proper distance apart outside the car and he's about to go in, he tried to shake my hand. And I had to tell him, we don't do that anymore. It's the best is an elbow bump, but a lot of things have changed. On October 1st, DCJ became the Department of Corrections contractor for transitional reentry services. Up until that point, our involvement began sometime after folks came out of prison. A probation officer referred them to us or through some other referral from another agency, but it's someone who had already been in the community coping with their own reentry process. Transitional reentry puts DCJ in the picture before folks are even released. It means we're now working with the staff in the prison that's helping to plan reentry for folks. So we get a say in that, and then we very often get to be the person that picks them up at the gate, as was the case with Ahmed. This program provides intensive case management for the first 90 days, like I said, often starting at the prison gate. And it also connects to all the other resources that our other reentry services provide, which is folks with case managers with years of experience and lots of connections to help folks find housing, help folks find employment. We keep a fund together to help people pay for identification if they need it. We keep our own small food bank. We also make referrals to other food banks, of course. So it's right there in the moment it's most needed. We are there from the handoff from the prison to help folks make the connections they need to succeed. That is in keeping with our work and keeping with we have a strategic planning process going on right now where we have established a new vision and mission. And DCJ is very unique in that we provide direct services, but we also work in the policy sphere. And we like to think that our policy work informs and is informed by those direct services. So we are a unique nonprofit, not just because we're 100 years old and don't have a national footprint or have a national organization providing support, but because of that sort of dual role in justice. So we look at our work with individuals as helping individuals to create justice in their individual lives while we work to create collective justice at the state level. So a major outcome of that strategic planning process has been that we've established a new mission and vision. And our vision is quite simply justice for all Delawareans. We believe it's our individual and collective responsibility to co-create a community that embodies equity, transparency, safety, and healing. And to that end, we work with lots of other organizations, as well as the work we do individually, and strategize with those organizations to create change in Delaware. Our mission, our new mission, is that we listen, we amplify, and we act to seek justice for all Delawareans through advocacy and services. And we are very lucky that we have Kayleigh Richards doing our policy work. She's terrific. She has actually been, and she's new to the position. She'll talk a little bit more about that, but she, in her listening, in keeping with our new mission, she's been talking with our program staff and also reflecting on the programs she personally coordinates, and she'll talk about that too, to think about the needs of the people we work with and how that can be translated into policy change. So without further ado, I'll hand it off to Kayleigh.
Thank you, Dave and Lynn, for the wonderful introductions. My name is Kayleigh Richards. I am the policy coordinator and program coordinator for Read and Read Out. So prior to serving in this policy position, I was the office coordinator and communications assistant at DCJ for the past 3 years. So I've had the privilege of working in different areas of the organization, and it's just it's given me a good advantage in transitioning into this new role. So before I get into the policy, I think I'll talk about Read and Read Out, which is what I do for a smaller chunk of my time at DCJ. Read and Read Out is a volunteer-ran program, meaning we work with Read Aloud Delaware. I'm not sure if you all are familiar. I think everyone has heard of Read Aloud Delaware. It's such an amazing organization. Mary Hirschbill, who was the executive director in 1999, started the program with Janet Laban, who was DCJ's executive director in 1999. They started it at Baylor for moms who had children. And so the moms would be able to read, and they were using cassette tapes at that time. And so the moms would be able to read, and they'll send the tape and the books to the kids. And then after a while, it expanded to everyone. So all incarcerated people, not just incarcerated parents, and not just moms. So we're actually at Howard R. Young, which is the men's correctional facility down in Wilmington. And the program has been around for 20 years, and it has really evolved. And I think the purpose of the program may have evolved as well. What I see when I saw when I first started working with the incarcerated people is that they use the program to parent. We encourage the parents or the incarcerated people to say more than what's in the book. So they can read, what's in the book, but it's also about positivity and positive communication. So making sure that, I don't know, I have parents who pray. I have, incarcerated people who pray at the end of every single reading, because some people treat it as like a nighttime book. So they say, all right, they coach their kid to get in the bed, snuggle up, say their prayers after the book is done, and they finish it off with the I love you. I have some parents who, or some incarcerated folks who request books based on, what lesson they want to teach their kids. So I had one parent who found out her kid was being bullied, and she requested, books on bullying after she found one in the library. And it kind of sparked everyone's interest, like, oh, wow, like I can also, use this program and use the books and use literacy to communicate with my kid in ways that I can't do. And I don't know if you all are aware, but, sorry, went on mute. Prisons aren't friendly, they're not a friendly place for kids. And Read and Read Out serves as a form of communication where, the kids don't have to worry about being searched, going through metal detectors, talking to their loved one, through a glass or over that phone that we see in movies. It is real. So, it's a free, and it's also free. That's another thing that I forgot to mention. I don't know if Dave mentioned that all of our programs are free. But the kids get to keep the books, keep the recording, and cherish them for as long as they'd like. So I guess I'll get into our policy work. Oh, and I guess I gotta say, Read and Read Out is on hold at the moment because of the pandemic. Sadly, it's at the end of the day, it's a little bittersweet, but DOC is doing what's best for the people inside, the people who live there and work inside those prisons, and I have to be okay with that. As long as we do what we have to do on the outside, the sooner things will be back to normal on the inside, and we can get back in there and start programming. So I will get into our policy work. So part of our policy work is also education. And we have a Visions of Justice initiative that we hold usually every fall. And it's a free conference. Sometimes we do charge a fee, but that's only to cover lunch. So it's no more than $5 or $10. And we do this as something for the community. You know, it's something to gather folks around a specific issue, provide education, breakouts, speakers, and ways to take action as well. We also just signed up for Annie E. Casey, the Annie E. Casey Foundation's Reimagine in Juvenile Justice training initiative. And I always forget to tell folks about that, so I have to say it now. We are working with the Youth Rehabilitative Services, which is a jurisdiction that houses juvenile probation. And so, you know, we were made aware of this opportunity, and we thought, you know, who can we engage? Who can we work with? Who can we collaborate with to improve Delaware's juvenile justice system? And, you know, we reached out to the director at YRS, and she was open and excited about the opportunity, and ended up recruiting 3 people from juvenile probation to work with us on this initiative. So once we finish our training at the end of the year, we have a training team that will be tasked with training stakeholders throughout the state of Delaware all next year about what we learned and how we can improve our system here in our state. We also hold, you know, just little events throughout the year. We had a panel discussion on bail reform and fines and fees over the summer. We have a virtual expungement and pardon clinic that's currently happening right now. We have a reentry panel happening next week. Just a bunch of things coming down the pipeline between now and the end of the year. So there's the education piece, and then that brings us to our agenda. So, you know, part of my job, like Dave said, is talking to the rest of my team who are on the ground, you know, working with people who are involved in the justice system. You know, what gaps are they seeing, right? What stories are their clients telling them? What challenges are they seeing? In DCJ, again, we have a unique advantage with, you know, considering the amount of programs that we have and the variety of programs, because we have, you know, we work with justice involved people in all different parts of the system, you know, who are part of different impacted communities, kind of within the larger impacted community. And so, no further ado, our bail, or not our bail, but our legislative agenda, which we spent 3 hours today working it out over Zoom. That was exciting. We will usually be in person, but this was interesting. I think, you know, we were able to really review, you know, past reforms and kind of things that have been going on as far as with our partners and so forth. So it was great. So I'm just gonna give like an overview of our legislative agenda. And if anyone has any questions, you know, I'll put my contact information in the chat. So our first priority is bail reform. In 2018, DCJ helped pass HB 204. Which was a bill to introduce the risk assessment tool to the courts. And you know, the importance of this risk assessment tool is to ensure that we are detaining people not based on their ability to pay bail, but more so the risk that they pose to society, because the end goal is public safety, right? And not necessarily, you know, who can afford to pay. So there's that, and then there's police reform. So given, everything that's happened this year, police reform has been a very hot topic. And it's something that, from what we've seen, it cannot wait. So there's, a few things that we're demanding as far as police reform. And one of them is to remove police presence from our schools. Studies show that SROs do not contribute to student safety. They don't prevent school shootings like we would like them to, and instead, they cause harm, which is usually sometimes, it looks like Black students being uh, targeted by SROs or negatively impacted by SRO practices. Uh, Another thing is mandatory electronic recordation of interrogations. And this is really important because it also prevents wrongful convictions. It also, creates better transparency in, interrogation. So, for example, let's say, someone who was under the influence, they falsely admitted to committing this crime. And so if we had, a video of that person, of that interrogation, we would be able to see that this person was just under the influence, and they may have gave a false statement. Uh, and this would have been really helpful in the Central Park 5 case, the exonerated 5, actually, the exonerated 5, which, we've seen that that the kids were intimidated, during their interrogation, and they may have been forced to give like a false confession. So there's that. And then let's see, a bunch of different places we can go with this, but I'm not gonna go through everything because we'll be here all night. Also, increasing transparency within law enforcement agencies, and that means making sure that we're collecting the data that we need to collect in order to inform our policies, and that this data is made available to the public, because I think we have a right to know how public safety is being enforced, and what's the status of public safety. So how many people are being arrested, the race of those people, when use of force is being used, and why, a bunch of different factors here that we should really be reviewing and collecting these this data, over the years, so that way we'll be able to see trends, patterns, if we need to, revisit our policies and procedures, and so forth. Another thing is wrongful convictions. That is an issue that is near and dear to my heart, especially after I had the opportunity to meet Elmer Daniels. He was incarcerated in Delaware for a little over 30 years at Howard R. Young Correctional Facility for a crime that he did not commit. Delaware currently does not have a process to compensate folks who are wrongfully convicted and released. So there is a bill that was introduced. It's HB 296, and it will create a process for Elmer Daniels to receive $50,000 a year for every year that he was incarcerated. However, given the current climate, that bill is going to require a big fiscal note. And so we, are going to continue to advocate for it, but also, talk with legislators about other avenues as far as payment is concerned, especially during this time. So how do we get justice for Elmer? Because I don't think, I don't think we should necessarily put him on the back burner. He has a very, very unique story. His reentry experiences is also unique, in the fact that, think about, I guess, if we put ourselves in Elmer's shoes, like think about being locked away for 30 years and then you come out and society is completely different. Think about what society looked like 30 years from now. How we apply for jobs, it was different. Technology is completely different. The cars are talking, the phones are talking, right? and things are just different. And he hasn't received an apology, nor has he received compensation for the injustice that he suffered. Um, and last but certainly not least, oh, there's two things: fines and fees. We in 2017, over 40,000 failure to pay warrants were issued to Delawareans. And failure to pay warrants are warrants that are issued literally because someone can't pay. And so the problem with this is, poor people are being negatively impacted by this practice. And just because someone can't afford to pay the bill, can't afford to pay a bill or a fine or a fee, does not mean that they should, even incur further fees or spend time in jail or have a warrant and have to worry about their freedom being taken at any time. And it's especially concerning for folks who may have a disability. So DCJ held a listening session, I believe in 2018, for people who were impacted by this issue. And what we heard was very disturbing. There was someone with PTSD, and he had a failure to pay warrant for a fine that he couldn't afford to pay. And he was sheltered in his house. And this was before COVID. This was before we had to quarantine. But he was inside most of the day because he was worried that he'll be stopped for some reason or whatever. But he was afraid that he'd be arrested because he had this warrant, and it really it wasn't great for his PTSD. He really struggled with it. There was someone else who didn't pay to register their dog, and the fine just doubled and then tripled. And she was afraid to call 911 or go to the doctors when she didn't feel well, just in case if they found out that she had a warrant, and they would call the police to arrest her. So this is a huge issue. It's a real issue, especially now, during the pandemic, where folks may be in a harder financial position than they were prior to this. And also, I don't think I mentioned driver's license suspension. So folks who don't pay fines, their license may be suspended. And that's an issue within itself, especially now during a pandemic where like people need their cars, like people need to be able to drive and travel. But also, outside of COVID, folks need to be able to get to and from work, drop their kids off at daycare. And the scary thing is, if you are driving with a suspended license and a warrant, you can be picked up if a cop stops you and they run your ID and they find that you have a warrant. So it's very scary. It's very scary. So that is our legislative agenda in a nutshell. We are really looking forward to working with community partners and stakeholders in advocating for these reforms and making sure that we see them through and that they're successful next legislative session.
Thank you, Kayleigh. And thank you especially for mentioning that work we're doing with the folks we work with in the juvenile justice community, the training work. I think it's easy to think that there's the lone path to change is legislative reform. And I think that's a huge and important part of the work. But I come from a background in victim services that there was always a coalition working above us. Including and even the police training that I used to do was part of that coalition work, where we tried to embed ourselves within the systems as well as work outside the systems to create change. And I think that's the best way to do it, is to find those allies within the system who know the system needs some work, and to build those relationships up. And then you kind of have somebody who has credibility when you're insisting on change. Well, the person you trust to do this work says it needs to be done differently too. So the last thing I wanted to talk about is ways folks can get involved, ways people can help. We are always looking for folks to get involved with our policy committee. We meet monthly, and that was the team that met this morning to finalize this agenda. As well as there are other volunteer opportunities with DCJ. Our mediation program is largely volunteer managed. That can be a very rewarding experience. And of course, supporting us financially. A little bit about our funding. DCJ, about 80% of our funding comes from state contracts, which is restricted to the programs they support. And it is a blessing and a curse. We're very glad to have that support to run our programs. But we are paid retroactively, so that creates a cash flow issue at times. And despite our commitment to it that remains undiminished and hopefully will grow, our policy work is entirely unfunded because, of course, government entities will not pay to they don't want to pay us because we bite the hand that feeds us. That's what I'm trying to say. So we still do that work. We still will do that work. And we depend on support from the community to make that work happen. So right now, we are doing a lot of friend raising and some fundraising to build out that capacity to make change by growing our unrestricted funds. And of course, we're very excited about our centennial. We'll be announcing either tomorrow or Monday officially that we're having a centennial celebration, an online annual event to take the place of the wonderful event we used to do in person to celebrate our centennial. And just to say, we need your help and support. And to that end, share one more slide. Okay, there we go. So thank you. As I said, there's our website to support us. To learn more about our work, you can take a peruse around the site to support us with a gift. You can click donate. If you have any questions for me, in addition to some time we're going to have here to do a Q&A, if you have something you don't think of until later, please feel free to email me. And I guess that opens it up for questions.
Thank you. I had
Then
one question.
You're muted.
Sorry, I always forget that. I'd like to know more about the opportunity to volunteer as a mediator. What does that involve? What types of things are being mediated?
Our mediation program works with the courts for cases that can be resolved through mediation before they have to go in front of a judge. And it does increase the chances for someone to get their record expunged. And the folks who want to become volunteer mediators will be put in contact with our program coordinator, Barbie Fisher, restorative justice folks don't like to toot their own horn, but she's a very, very, very skilled and talented person in the world of restorative justice, which is where the way we look at mediation has grown from. And she would be responsible for working with individuals and making sure they have the training to do it.
And we, just to add to that, so we get a lot of requests for landlord and tenant mediations, especially now. So, for example, I don't know, you've had like a leaking ceiling and your landlord hasn't fixed it in a month, and you don't necessarily want to take them to court because we know court could result in fees, court fees, and jail time, and other stuff. So we see a lot of landlord tenant issues, and also, disputes. Sometimes the office could get a little rowdy with mediation. But Barbie, like Dave said, Barbie is so skilled, and sometimes it may take an hour, it may take 2 hours, but she gets it resolved. So something like a fight or a broken window, and the mediation gives folks a chance to request restitution, right? So that's another positive of the program. But literally anything. Barbie has mediated capital murder cases, not with DCJ, but just that's how far her expertise goes. So yeah, she has the capacity to mediate a wide variety of disputes.
Thank you.
I had a question about wrongful convictions and rape kits. We've heard around the country that there's hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of unanalyzed rape kits. Does Delaware fall into that category of having kits that were never properly handled or taken care of or lost or misplaced or unanalyzed?
Delaware, our AG's office has an integrity unit that specifically focuses on wrongful convictions and reviewing past cases where, the verdict or the evidence may have been questionable. But not that I know of. Delaware, we also not, well, let me not say this, because there may be people who are inside who haven't been exonerated yet. But Delaware has a small population compared to the rest of the country of folks who are wrongfully convicted that we know of. But to answer your question, Roger, I don't think so. But I can say that Kathy does have, Attorney General Jennings does have an integrity unit that prevents that from happening.
I actually just shared an article in the chat, a link. Apparently, there was an effort that took about 4 years, but the backlog was pretty much cleared as of last year.
No, okay.
Oh, that's good.
Dave, I've got a question for you.
Yes.
This is Brock Job. And actually, it would be to Kayleigh as well. You touched on in your policy discussion the issue of police reform. And I'm just curious, again, I'd like to know more about this. I assume you're not working on this alone. I assume there are many groups that are involved in this. And can you say a little more about what you're aiming to do, who you're working with, and how you actually affect change in this area?
We always, because of scarce resources, obviously, we're always looking to work with coalition partners, but that also means we have a louder voice when we approach these issues. DCJ is part of the Coalition for Smart Justice, which is an initiative of the ACLU that has done some really great collective work. The criminal justice reform bill package from the beginning of the last legislative session was a huge victory. Well, let me be more guarded about that. It was a victory, rather a surprising one, where 11 of, was it 19 bills were passed, 18 or 19 bills. We are a concern since that time is, again, good law is made, but that doesn't necessarily change the way the law is implemented. Which is why we're always going back and re-examining these policy initiatives. But we communicate with our allies regularly of other groups. Even in the formulation of this legislative agenda, we talked to the Coalition to Dismantle the New Jim Crow, the Campaign to End Debtors' Prisons, the Campaign for Smart Justice that I mentioned before, the Poor People's Campaign, to make sure we're doing work in line with one another, but not necessarily doing the same work, and deciding who's going to quarterback this issue and who's going to provide support. I think that answers part of your question. That I got so much into the answer, I've forgotten some of the details. Go ahead.
Well, depending on whether you read the Chimes article or are up to date on what the News Journal has even published, remember at the end of the last legislative season, they did create a law enforcement accountability task force. So there is a task force that has been formed, several subcommittees, and Kayleigh and I are both on different subcommittees, and we have at least 2 representatives from this Coalition for Smart Justice on each of the subcommittees. So that's some of the official track of where recommendations are supposed to be being developed that they will then go forward. There's a lot of skepticism among some of us about how what will result from that task force process, and what recommendations will be put forward and whether they'll be listened to when they are put forward. So there will still be a lot of advocacy work to do in addition to whatever happens through that official government process. So DCJ, ACLU, and many other organizations will continue to advocate for reforms and changes that I'm guessing will go beyond what may even come out of that official process.
Are we advocating for statewide or the state police or individual city police, or how big an umbrella, if you will, are we working toward?
I'll let
I would say statewide, statewide, all across the board, police reform. Mr. Job asked, what do we do? So with the Law Enforcement Accountability Task Force, it's given us the opportunity to work with law enforcement and DCJ. When any reform, if it pertains to law enforcement, we engage law enforcement. We bring everyone around the table to talk about these reforms, and that's why the data is so important. Because we're not proposing these reforms just because we just for the heck of it. We want to make sure that things are evidence-based and that the reforms that we propose, that we have buy-in from law enforcement, from faith-based organizations, from nonprofits, in order to just create a better system for everyone, and that includes law enforcement.
And also, as we've been invited into these I'm sorry, talking over somebody. No? As we've been invited into discussions, particularly over the course of the summer, as protests there's been a groundswell of protest over the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and others, too many to name, too many to count, heartbreaking to count. One of the things I feel like it's been DCJ's responsibility to do is to remind the folks having these discussions that they did not begin because law enforcement and the community decided that a discussion needed to be had. It was the community that decided that a discussion needed to be had, and that it is okay if law enforcement is a little uncomfortable in that discussion. Something we're looking at. Delaware is one of, I think, 13 states that has a law enforcement officer's Bill of Rights, which has gotten in the way of some of the transparency we're working toward. And as controversial as it may be to say it is a barrier to really understanding what's going on, and from that point, creating justice, building justice. So it needs to go. We still want law enforcement officers to be safe. We still want good police to be doing good work. We want the good apples to get to do good work, but we want to make sure that the bad apples that we hear so much about are held accountable.
Mm-hmm. And another thing about police reform is police. So the amount of arrests that police make, that fuels mass incarceration. Like that fuels our prison population. And when you look at the data, some of these practices we know are, one, rooted in racism. Two, they create more harm than good, like mass incarceration, right? So one of DCJ's priorities has always been alternatives to incarceration. I think there's a way that we can, re-envision our justice system that in a way that doesn't result in more incarceration or it heightens one's chance to reoffend. So it's y'all, this is so important. This is so important, and it is the intersectionality of these issues is absolutely glaring. So I think making sure that police reform we are looking at it as part of a bigger picture, And again, it's for all Delawareans, and not just, the community versus law enforcement. We want to work together as one community, to ensure public safety.
Yeah, could I just add one thing to we were talking about the effort right now that we're working on to expand the vision of justice, because DCJ over the years has focused primarily on the criminal justice system, and in particular on rehabilitating people that leave the system. But I think we've also have a realization that if we don't fix the overall social and economic context, we're sort of spitting in the wind, so to speak, because, and so one of the things that I think we're going to try to focus on more is how do we help grow the economy in an inclusive way and provide opportunities for people, because I think we've realized that that's just as much part of justice as the formal criminal justice system. And it's a huge problem, and we'd be I guess a new player in that area, and maybe a minor player in that area, but it's an important context, because I think the business community in particular has a lot to contribute to the dialogue on that subject. Anyway, I just wanted to that's one of my pet desires, I guess, in terms of that expanded vision.
Thank you for sharing that, David. Appreciate that.
Do you folks get involved in voter oppression kinds of issues, or seeing that that people can are not denied the right to vote or made challenging? How does Delaware stand in your view with regard to voter suppression practices?
That's a good question. I know we have taken, with our coalition partners, we've always supported Get Out the Vote campaigns, particularly the Campaign for Smart Justice, which in many ways was organized around in Delaware around getting the vote out in 2018 for the midterms. So DCJ was a part of that. My limited knowledge of voter suppression and the vote issue in general in Delaware has been, the need to update our systems, which does seem to be happening, to prevent them from because the systems we had in place were so old there wasn't even software upgrades for the devices, and things were easily hacked. As far as individual voter suppression, I'm not terribly well informed on the issue, but we clearly support everyone having their vote, and that vote not being impeded.
Delaware is a state that has not implemented a lot of the draconian voter ID and voter purge actions and limited resources to minority precincts. But we do have an issue about returning citizens and their ability to vote. And that probably should be the issue that we are most focused on, because we have a significant number of formerly incarcerated returning citizens on parole or probation or not, who have an issue with being able to exercise their right to vote. So I think that's Delaware's #1 challenge in expanding the right to vote and being fair.
Thank you.
I echo what Sue said. Yeah.
One of the things you mentioned was recordization. Was that mandatory recording of interrogations? And it's sort of odd with all the abilities we have to record everything like this, that we're not doing that. It's like a cell phone. Does that take legislation, or does that violate the officer's Bill of Rights, or what is it that's the impediment from simply taking an iPhone and recording an interrogation?
That is the $1 million question. It's literally just a piece of technology. A video recorder is like, you can get a good one for like $50. I don't know, Roger. I don't know. I can look into it and get back to you. Dave, do you have an idea of why they wouldn't want the interrogations to be recorded?
Well, I have a lot of ideas why I think they wouldn't want interrogations to be recorded. I think that our most diplomatic answer to that question is what I'm observing of the subcommittees of the Law Enforcement Accountability Task Force working is a lot of it's really impressive. There's some good discussions going on, and we are guardedly optimistic that those good discussions will translate into good policy recommendations. And that's really where our work begins, is to push those policy recommendations forward, including any kind of body cams or recording devices that are needed to make sure police officers are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And I think in that moment, that discussion will intensify. And it may be that we're reaching out to folks like you to contact your legislators and say, DCJ's on this, Coalition for Smart Justice is on this, I'm on this too. Why are we not doing this?
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, it's so important that we keep having conversations like this, because I didn't know that interrogations weren't recorded. Like it seems like low hanging fruit. So, that's why I just love having conversations like this, so that we could all share, what we know about the system. Like there's some shocking things that I didn't know until 2 months ago, being in this position, like kids who are arrested off of school property can be suspended from school and sent to alternative school just because they are arrested. And this is before trial. And so what our program coordinator sees, our program director that works in Ferris with justice involved youth, he's seeing kids who are being sent to alternative school and not going back to their school before the school that they were at. And he sees those kids as, some of the kids, they go in there great kids, and like all kids, no kids are like bad, but they don't pose a risk or a threat to others. So it's just kind of like it just fuels the school to prison pipeline even further, because you're taking these kids out of their regular school environment, and you're placing them in alternative school with kids who may be a threat to others or may need to be in that environment. So it's very problematic.
Especially when we know that the Black and brown communities in Delaware are over-policed, and that Black and brown youth are just more likely to be arrested for something than a kid in a white neighborhood. And we've got a school to prison pipeline that this is a major driver at the front end of that. And once you get into that alternative school, you're in a climate, it's like going to jail. You in America, you go to prison and you come out learning how to be a better criminal. You don't get rehabilitated.
I wanted to say on that recording issue, I've actually seen studies discussing the advantages to the police of recording interrogations, not only because the person recorded is going to have a hard time denying they ever said what they said, but in addition, and perhaps less obviously, it preserves evidence, and oftentimes in an interrogation, something may be said that is not of any particular consequence at the time it's said and doesn't get taken down in notes. And it's only later that you realize, oh my God, that there was something significant said, they didn't realize it. And you can go back to that evidence and do that. So it to me, the recording of the interrogation is not only helpful it's helpful to everybody in a way.
Any other questions?
This may have already been answered earlier on when Roger asked something, but you mentioned, Kayleigh, the incidents of a person who had been in prison for 30 years and had not committed the crime. How prevalent is that kind of thing as far as Delaware goes?
So in Delaware, there are about 6 cases that we know of. I know 2 of those people, so Elmer Daniels and Marlo Wright. If you Google their names, their stories will pop up. They've been super vocal. I think Dave's on it right now. I see that look in your eye. Dave's getting the links.
Oh, you see the reflection in my glasses.
But yeah, so it is, it's not as prevalent as it is in, other states, but Delaware is small. And I think that gives us an advantage to put reforms in place to prevent this from happening to anyone.
It's tragic, even if it's one, but it's tragic no matter what. But I was just curious when you mentioned it and how often it actually happens in a year's time. Like, so let's say this particular year, have there been a lot of incidents uncovered when somebody has actually been incarcerated? I bet 30 years. I mean, it's just.
Of course, in Delaware, the fiscal argument, well, not just Delaware, but in other places, but in Delaware especially, the fiscal argument against any policy changes is huge. But we never, instead, if we're questioning paying this person $50,000 a year for every year they were incarcerated, no one's questioning the fact that it costs about that much to just keep incarcerating them. It's so expensive. It's the most expensive solution to a problem, and one that doesn't really work. So, and especially when we're not talking about 1,000 cases. We're talking about a manageable number, and certainly, who can put a price tag on justice for someone? 30 years is unbelievable. It's disgusting.
Dave, is there any compensation that's provided just to provide extra help for these people to put their lives back together when they come out? Because that to me is the most compelling argument. If you're in prison for 10 years and you come out, your life has been damaged considerably by being in prison, and you need help to try to remedy that. And so in a sense, it's just getting somebody back to zero in a way.
Not that I'm aware of. I think it really is a streetcar named Desire. It's depending on the kindness of strangers at that point, and family. But even at that point, especially in the process to get someone exonerated, how much of the family's resources, if they even had them to begin with, are depleted by that process?
And so Marlo Jermaine Wright actually spent 20 years on death row. So that means he was kept away from general population and was kept under even more strict conditions than other folks. And I believe there's a line in the bill that would require extra compensation for folks who were on death row, folks who were wrongfully convicted and on death row. So yeah, it's scary. I had the opportunity to talk to Anthony Ray Hinton, who is one of Brian Stevenson's clients, and one thing that he told me that kind of stuck with me was he lost his mom while he was wrongfully imprisoned and on death row, and his mom was his world, and she died while he was inside, and that you can't put a price tag on that, but I think a lot of people who are wrongfully convicted, they even go without an apology, let alone compensation.
Well, if there are no more questions, we've already gone well over our hour. So I thank you everyone for coming this evening. Thank you, Dave and Kayleigh, for a wonderful, informative presentation. I think we all learned a lot. So thank you very, very much. Sue, do you have any closing comments?
Only to say thank you so much for being here. We're delighted to have this Thursday evening series of education events with a broad range of topics. I think you've raised a lot of thought-provoking points and some questions about how each of us might find a connecting point to make a difference in the lives of people who desperately need and appropriately need assistance, either to rectify a wrong or to find a way to return to a productive life in society. We don't do a very good job of that. We never have, and it seems to have been getting worse. And so if there are ways that we as individuals, as a group, as volunteers can make a difference, I think it would be a rewarding and satisfying way to spend our time, even in the midst of a pandemic. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please
Thank you,
be in
Dave.
touch with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.